They drop out of warp a little over an AU from the star. Cletus gasps out of sleep, presumably disturbed by the tiny indicator light by his head flipping to green. "The bunnies," he mumbles. Ron clears his throat in irritation. "That's right, Cleet. Time for the bunnies to jump back up your ass." "Are we there yet?" "We sure are, little buddy." Cletus unbuckles and waddles over to the view screen. "The bunnies don't live in my ass, Cheeto." Ron slaps the idiot. "Excuse me, son?" "The bunnies don't live in my ass, Captain Cheeto." The captain is soothed. Staring at the screen, Cletus's brow wrinkles in horror. "The whole planet disappeared." Of course, the planet is right there on the view screen. After 15 years of star hopping, Ron Jeter knows where to look. He can see its little shadow in the starlight, no problem. He could slap the kid again just for efficiency's sake, but Untermenches are so dumb it'd probably just confuse the point. Besides, he remembers being underwhelmed by the emptiness between planets on his first hop. At least the poor fool is feeling something. Ron doesn't have the heart to spoil that purity. "No, kid." He points out the dark splotch on the black background. "She's right there." "Well, that's not a planet, it's too small." Ron's throat grows hot as he feels his better instincts kicking in again. "Go wake up the others," he barks. Cletus giggles like a little queer before hobbling off down the hall. Ron returns his attention to the planet slowly growing closer on the view screen. He thinks he can make out the moon nearby. They're just black specks in the radiant starlight, but he knows them both to be the same ashy gray color. The moon was always like that, more or less, but the planet used to be blue. A shining sapphire with streaks of opal and swirling quartz, the most beautiful jewel in the sky. Of course, back then, the sky was everywhere but that little planet. Cletus comes back a few minutes later with the women in tow. Candy shuffles over and plops into the chair beside Ron, staring disinterestedly over her coffee at the planet on the view screen. Her idiot, Juniper, talks excitedly with Cleet, their hands clasped in an odd tangle. A few months ago, Candy made sure they become a breeding pair, meaning she pointed at Cletus one day and said, "Go fuck that one." They've been nigh inseparable ever since. The captain can't help but feel a twinge of jealousy at seeing the two of them together. If it weren't a capital offense, he'd do things to her that'd make the devil blush. "Not much to look at, is she?" says Candy. Ron almost laughs before realizing she's talking about the planet. It's filling a good 50% of the view screen by now, and a lot more detail is visible. Ron thinks he can make out the shapes of continents and oceans that once were. "Looks like something Cletus pulled out of the drain," he jokes. "It looks like quark dust." Cletus giggles. "Looks like something I pulled out of my belly button." Juniper laughs. Candy sets down her coffee and starts typing into the computer. "What are you doing?" asks Cletus. "Sending out a probe," Candy responds. Ron snorts. "Why?" Cleet prods. Juniper giggles. "We need to test the surface conditions to calibrate our suits." "What's that mean?" "You know what calibration means," Ron snaps. "Go make breakfast." Cletus scuttles obediently out of the cockpit, leaving Juniper behind. "You're mean," she spits. Candy shoots Ron a dark look before he can retort. "Cletus is a big boy, Junie. Don't emasculate him or he won't love you." Juniper shuts up. Candy continues interfacing with the computer while Ron steers the ship closer to the dead world, drifting eastward around its equator until comfortably in the morning twilight over what must have been vast open fields once upon a long time ago. The sunlight glints across the wrinkles of a nearby mountain range, and for a second, three members of what remains of the human race forget that they're staring at the mutilated corpse of their homeworld. "Why'd they do it?" Juniper asks. Candy is roused from her work. There's a deep thunk from below as the probe is launched. "Why'd they set the world on fire?" Candy frowns as if searching for the right words to answer the idiot's question. Ron saves her the trouble. "The world was impure." "Oh," says Juniper. "Well, that's good then." She stares out of the glittering wasteland and smiles. "It's purty and white now." They discuss their upcoming excursion over 4 bowls of synthetic pork-flavored slop prepared by their very own Chef Boyardard. It's to be the first scouting mission to the planet since the recent development of the appropriate metastabilizers. No one is sure yet whether or not they'll find anything valuable down there on the surface, but it's a unique enough place in the universe that the big heads are betting there will be. Of course, Ron would never say anything so blasphemous out loud, but based on what he's heard about strange matter and quark dust, he wonders if their highnesses have just been feeling overly sentimental for the old rock. Whatever the reason, they're willing to risk one of the fleet's best hoppers and its captain just to check it out. Plus, the pay is astronomical, so he's not about to complain. The probe is done with its business by the time they've finished breakfast, and after a quick trip to the shitter, they're diving into the planet's gravity well. Up close, the gray stuff looks a lot less like dust and a lot more like whatever the hell quark is. Doesn't look like regular matter. Doesn't look like it quite belongs in this reality. It jitters and ripples randomly. Not quite solid, not quite liquid either. Not quite here, not quite there, like the whole planet is just a thin slice of some alien leviathan from outside time itself, slithering through a crack in this world on its way to a dimension beyond even the big head's understanding. Whenever the ship's G-bubble skims the surface, tiny droplets break off, popping and dribbling in random directions all around them, breaking and fusing, sometimes vanishing completely before reappearing somewhere else. "So pretty," whispers Juniper. "Scally," says Cletus. Ron can't say he disagrees with either of them. They arrive at the spot designated by the probe and put the ship into idle. Ron unbuckles himself and stands up slowly. Surface gravity is a hell of a lot higher than what they're used to. The ship is able to compensate for the most part, but he can still feel the dead earth trying to yank his organs out through his rectum. Once he's sure that's not going to happen, he gives the others the all-clear to follow him to the back and suit up. Like the recently upgraded ship, these newfangled suits are surrounded by a series of energy fields to protect their cargo from the effects of the hyperstable matter surrounding them. They step out of the ship, floating on bubbles of nothing like kids at a hover rink. Naturally, the idiots go apeshit. They bob and bounce around, in awe of the rippling alien landscape, a pair of doofy elves completely oblivious to the fragile barrier that separates them from dissolving into cork dust like the rest of the human race. Ron breathes deep to center himself. They've only got a few hours of oxygen to get their business done. Less if Cletus and Juniper don't cut it with their frivolous games. He orders everyone to calm down, missing the days when suits had shock collars. Too energy inefficient, apparently. "Candy, what the hell do they want from us?" She glides over to a compartment on the ship's underside and removes a pair of large devices shaped like 20th century vacuum cleaners. The idiots are waiting nearby, antsy but patient. She hands them each a device and points out their simple controls.
"We're gonna clean up all this cork dust,"
Junie shouts gleefully. "We're going to collect as many samples as will fit on the hopper," Candy explains. "You dummies get to sucking up the physical specimens while Jeter and I get the digital. Sound like a plan?" The idiots both giggle deliriously at the word sucking, but nod and repeat back their orders. "Well, what are you waiting for?" barks Ron. "Let's get this over with." The work is slow and boring to the point that Ron almost wishes one of the suits would malfunction just for a break in the monotony. After a while, he gives up entirely on reprimanding the idiots for losing focus. Them playing with ludicrously expensive material out of the corner of his eye is at least moderately more interesting than the endless rolling hills of dead gray nothingness around them. At one point, he gets desperate enough to ask Candy what the readings on their sensor arrays mean. He regrets it immediately as she spends the next half hour droning on about strangelets, nuclear pasta, metastability, and the indestructibility of leptons. "This matter is highly exotic. It'll swallow you whole if you so much as look at it funny. But it's still surrounded by an electron shell. If it had a gaseous form at these temperatures, you can only imagine the thunderstorms." The captain yawns silently behind the dark visor of his hoversuit. "I can only imagine." After another hour or two, they round a bend along the side of a glittering hill and stumble across something truly interesting. Rising up from the ground, towering over the desolate landscape, stands a tall, familiar branching structure. "Well, I'll be," Candy whispers. "Is that a goddamn tree?" Ron blurts. Candy approaches the object immediately and starts taking readings. "Or the ghost of one," she says. "Fossil, more like." Ghost sounds more apt. It looks like some digital entity trying to disguise itself as something normal. The way it jitters and phases, it looks like it's imitating the way branches sway in the wind. It's eerie, and suddenly Ron wants nothing more than to chop it down. "Should we bag it?" he asks. Candy shoots him a faceless look, helmet tilted to one side. "Why? It's made of the same stuff as everything else around here." "It's alive," Juniper gasps. Candy pauses for an uncomfortably long while before responding. "Probably not." Something dark and foreboding whines in the pit of Ron's belly. An old buried memory or something, an instinct baked into his very bones. He resists the powerful urge to draw his gun and shoot the haunting tree, lest he scare the idiots and make Candy think he's gone loopy. He turns his back to the phenomenon and barks, "Come on then, let's leave it alone." He makes it about 20 yards before realizing that no one is following. He looks around to see the three of them planted firmly at the base of the monument, gazing up at it with a sort of reverence. Like heathen Jews gathered around the golden calf at the base of Sinai, they look moments away from prostrating themselves before the ungodly tree. That primal fear is quickly being replaced by righteous fury, and he starts to skate back over to them, breathing slowly and deliberately in order to conserve his dwindling oxygen. Juniper reaches out and bats at one of the branches, which disintegrates into a cloud of jittering bubbles before slowly phasing back into shape. Candy pulls her idiot back. "Oh, let him play with it," Ron says over the radio. "This is an important archaeological discovery," Candy explains. "Could very well be the only cork dust fossil in the entire universe." The sound of the word archaeology makes Ron's skin crawl. one of those half-baked pseudosciences that only ever served to separate their ancestors from divinity, in a practice he can't believe the Big Head's ever allowed to leave this planet. But then, the Big Heads didn't get that nickname for leaving well enough alone. He picks up the pace.
Candy's right, kids. We better get on with the mission. Leave that thing for the next poor saps they send out here to die.
Just a tick, Jeter, Candy says. They'll want us to get as many readings on this thing as we can. Help me out, would you? The tanks are full. Once we're done here, we can turn in for the day. Ron's guts howl at the thought of spending another second in this unholy valley, but he nods anyways and pulls out his scanner. He points to the top of the hill.
You dipshits have done a good job. Why don't you head up there and check out the scenery? Leave the tanks here.
Cletus and Juniper oblige happily, literally dancing up the hill, leaving their betters alone with the real work. Candy switches over to their private channel and says, Well, that was awfully kind of you. Ron shakes his head.
Something ain't right here.
What do you mean? He's flabbergasted.
Don't you feel it?
I'm feeling a lot of things, she says, almost wistfully. Don't tell me our big, strong captain is getting scared.
Scared doesn't begin to describe...
He catches himself. Candy laughs. Hell, Jeter, I didn't know you were capable of profundity. What's wrong? He steps back and gestures to the tree.
You really mean to tell me that this thing doesn't make you uncomfortable?
She eyes the fossil up and down as if inspecting it for the first time. No, not particularly. He stares at her for a good while. She looks away and continues scanning the object. Take a deep breath, Cap. You're an animal returning to its den, and the whole forest is dead. It's natural to overreact a little. He digs deep to find the patience not to smack her for calling him an overreacting animal, and returns to scanning. After a few silent moments, he asks,
How much data do we need?
She checks her own readings and shrugs. I'll let you know. He ignores the minor power move and continues to walk around the tree, allowing the technology to do the hard part while his mind distracts itself with what he might do with his earnings once they get back home. Buy some fancy liquor to start, maybe start working on building a little cruiser or an ice place. Hell, he could blow it all on a luxury asteroid if he really wanted. His daydreaming is cut off by the grating sound of Cletus' voice over the comms. Bunnies, Jeter! He hoots deliriously. We found bunnies! Ron and Candy look at each other, and the queasiness comes back in full force. What do you mean bunnies? Candy asks. Bunnies, Cletus reiterates. On the side of the hill. Are they hopping? The perverse excitement in her voice is unmistakable. No, says Cleet. Walking. The captain makes a snap decision between horror and boredom.
I'll go check it out.
Candy nods. I ought to be done soon. The captain nods back and begins gliding wordlessly up the hill. Cap? Candy's voice reappears in Ron's ear. Whatever it is, don't let anyone touch it.
10-4.
He gets to the top to find the idiots furiously clutching at each other's hands, roaring with mirthy laughter. As if that weren't unsettling enough, halfway down the opposite slope, where the ground levels off to a secondary hill, stands a pair of silvery gray creatures. The tallest stands about 4 or 5 feet, with long legs, long ears, and a snout. The other is about half the size, and both are made entirely out of cork dust, just like the tree. They don't seem to notice the interlopers, though they stand stoic and alert as if spooked by some other ghost in the empty valley. Finally, seemingly assured that whatever caught their attention has moved on from this place, they continue walking up the hill toward the humans. Each step is unlike the step of a normal solid animal. Their legs seem to crumble beneath them, flickering and melting into the undulating earth before phasing back into place, dissolving and coagulating into fresh body parts where normal matter would simply move. Those aren't bunnies, Cletus. The sound of Candy's voice from behind makes Ron jump, though nobody seems to notice. Yuh-huh, Cletus protests. Told you so, says Juniper. It's cows. Girl ones. Candy laughs like she's never quite gotten used to making the sound. They're dear, sweetheart.
They're ghosts,
Ron says a little too forcefully. Without a word, Candy unhooks her scanner and begins recalibrating it. The deer ghosts continue to approach, staring with eyeless faces right through the group of levitating humans. Without thinking this time, Ron pulls out his blaster and aims it at the head of the smaller ghost. Before the instinctive cries of, "No, stop," and "What the hell are you doing?" can reach his brain for processing, he's pulled the trigger. There is no atmosphere for the usual blap of the gun to carry through. A dimly glowing wave of energy smacks into the silver calf. Its head and left foreleg evaporate into a glistening, almost technicolor splash of disrupted cork dust. Neither deer seems bothered by this turn of events. The big one continues crumbling and reforming in a predetermined direction, the remaining half of the little one following dutifully behind. The humans have a somewhat different reaction. Juniper begins wailing hysterically. Candy steps in to ask firmly that the captain hand over his gun. Cletus' face remains invisible behind the visor of his hoversuit, but over the speakers in everyone's ears erupts a deranged howl of a stinking primate getting ready to start hurling feces. Before anyone can react, the moron tackles the captain. With nothing but a cushion of energy beneath the two men, they begin tumbling. Droplets of cork dust jitter and flow up around them where the bobbing momentum presses their force fields a little too deep into the surface. Cletus claws at the blaster in Ron's hands. The raw, primitive strength of the idiot is too much, so Ron changes tactics, using his free hand to try and shove at Cleet's head. A fleck of cork dust gets between hand and helmet, magnifying the force of the shove. Cletus's neck whips back and he loses focus. The break in concentration is brief, but it's enough for the captain to regain control. He pistol whips his companion. Cleet's head whiplashes to the other side. Ron's other hand delivers an uppercut and his knee rams into the kid's sternum. He rides the momentum into a somersault, swivels around, and before the dazed idiot's brain can catch up to the first strike, Ron fires the blaster. On the ground, the kid's helmet cracks and caves in. The usual vacuum blush sets in. The eyes begin to bulge. Ron fires again, this time lower down on the abdomen. The suit's energy field flickers, but doesn't quite fail. A flicker is enough. An unseen particle of cork dust finds its way through. Ionization releases a strangelet into the system, and the conversion begins. Ron's heard stories about what strange matter does. Apparently none of them were true. Cracks like bolts of lightning spread through Cletus's body. A brilliant, divine light pours out like molten gold. The edges of the cracks blister and melt into a white-hot plasma, shimmering with billions of microscopic rainbows, rippling and dancing like the surface of an 11-dimensional oil slick. The process takes far longer than he would have imagined, but eventually the body is consumed by the shimmering cracks. Finally, what remains is little more than an effigy of what was once a living body, perfectly formed from heavenly snow. Ron's awe begins to fade, and he notices Candy standing beside him with scanner in hand, dutifully recording the unique phenomenon. He looks from her to the corpse to Juniper, then back to the corpse. "Sorry," he says. Juniper whimpers, caught between grief and terror.
It's fine,
Candy says finally, hooking the scanner back on her belt.
she was already pregnant.